Hello. I guess I just want to get to what it is I'm going to get into. And I've been making these videos about my departure from the Word of Faith movement. I was raised in a charismatic Christian home, and I was brought up into it, and I myself became zealous in the charismatic movement, believing that, you know, uh, uh, well, I mean, in the tenets of the Word of Faith, that that I can speak, uh, you know, things into existence. That I was like a little God, since I'm in the image of God. I'm a spirit like God, and I'm capable of doing what God is able to do. That is, speak things into existence. And that's the gist of the gist of the Word of Faith movement. Is that, hey, if you believe something and you speak something into it's a seed that grows and becomes a harvest and becomes reality, right? That's the Word of Faith in a nutshell. One of the reasons why I left, because I want to get to it. I don't want to dance around it. It's the meat of the video. I left the Word of Faith for several reasons. Examining, just being honest with myself, examining what I had become, observing what the people around me had become, and just being brutally honest with myself. Like, I saw myself becoming a narcissist, thinking that life and everything in my life was about what it was I could get from God, based on, what I thought. That I could change my life or change the life of people around me based on me. I became, I was becoming a narcissist. So this is one of the reasons. I'm kind of I'm not getting into everything because it's a lot to unpack, really. It really is. The mind job that the Word of Faith was, or that those beliefs, adopting those beliefs, had become, in a, essentially, where it says, where God does all that He pleases in the Scriptures. It says it multiple times, right? In Psalms and in Isaiah, the prophets are quoting Yahweh, and God is saying, I'm Yahweh. I can do all that I please. The Word of Faith kind of tricked me, or I tricked myself into believing that God will do all that I please, or all that the believer pleases. One problem that I saw with it, or began to see with the Word of Faith, and it took me a while to see it, was that, you know, God became a debtor to me, right? The God who is above all became a debtor to me. When you get really honest with yourself, like, God makes a promise. The rationale that we have in the Word of Faith movement, or in charismatic circles, is that God makes a promise to you, right? And because he can't lie, he's obligated to keep that promise, and so what we often have done in the Word of Faith movement, is that we look at Scripture, and we take, Scripture out of context. We narcissist the Scriptures. We say everything that God says in the Scriptures, every promise He makes, is to us, right? And then we say, well, because it is to us, then, well, I should have this thing. I should have the desires of my heart. If I'm doing A, B, and C, like the passage says, oh, delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. Like, we take these passages and we go, oh, well, you know what? If I do A, B, and C, then God is essentially obligated to give me what I want, right? My will be done. God does all I please, right? Because I'm doing all of these things. One problem with that, and one obvious problem with that, as we're 4 minutes in and some change in, right? One of the biggest problems with that is that God becomes a debtor. The Most High God, who does whatever it is He wishes, is now a debtor to me. It's no longer, you know, the gifts of God are no longer gifts, but they're owed to the believer, right? They're owed because God has to, with air quotes, God has to keep a promise because he can't lie. And there's a lot to, again, like I said, a lot to unpack about these passages where it talks about it's impossible for God to lie, and you know, that's another video to get into. I wish I could get into it without talking for 30 minutes, but yes, God can do, scripturally speaking, can do anything he wants to do. And I've come to the conclusion that God's decision, or the impossibility for God to lie, all stems from a choice in his conscience. God having a morality, a code within himself. He doesn't answer to anybody. God answers to no one. He's the Most High, right? He can do all he pleases, like the scripture says, right? If he's the Most High, there's nothing over him. There's no standard over him. There's no force that moves him or forces him to do anything. And that includes you. That includes your faith. Your faith doesn't move God, right? God, anything you get from God, anything you and I have received from God has been, and I've had to come to this realization. It's an act of his mercy. It's an act of his compassion towards us, and not because he owes us anything, right? That's something that I slowly learned, with one brutal or with one bad experience after the next in my faith walk, right? One unanswered prayer, one thing going the opposite direction of what it was I thought it was going to go, or thought that God promised me it would go, right? People dying, friends dying, family members dying, you know what I mean? That you're confessing, and we're confessing, and we're naming it, and we're claiming it, and we're blabbing it, and we're trying to grab it, and it ain't coming, it ain't happening, right? Another problem with that I had with the Word of Faith, aside from examining my narcissism, was that, or closeted narcissism, was that we when you're in the Word of Faith, and you're forcing yourself to believe the things that you speak. Well, you believe the things that you believe it when you're zealous for it. Like, I wouldn't speak and try to call things into existence if I didn't believe that my words had some effect on reality. And I would do it and do it and do it over and over and over again. And when I wouldn't see the results to what it was I was doing, there was always some excuse as to why these things weren't coming to pass. And it was always on me, but there was always an excuse aside from the obvious thing, the obvious truth, the obvious reason was being that it's not the way God promised it, right? It's not what God said we could do. It's not within my power. I have no control over reality. But the problem with it, and I'm getting to this, and I'm kind of with one of these, where I'm going with this is, another thing that got me out of it was that I noticed with each unanswered prayer, with each prayer that didn't go the way, or confession that didn't go the way I thought it would go, that I was told it would go because I believed it, I would see and I would notice the crowd of the Word of Faithers, including myself, practicing denying the reality of the situation, the truth. Reality and truth, to the audience that watches, that cares, reality and truth are the same thing. And in the Word of Faith circles, you're taught that truth and facts aren't the same. And that's a load of hogwash, right? What I learned in my departure from the Word of Faith, in my absconding from the Word of Faith, was that truth and reality, truth and facts, they're just synonymous. They're synonymous terms. Like, facts, truth, reality are all the same, one and the same. If something is true, it will show itself to be true. If you're saying that I can confess something into reality and it's not happening, chances are that what I'm thinking and what I'm believing isn't true, right? And the problem that we have, that Word of Faithers have 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 dug themselves into, and I dug myself into it as I was 10 years into it, zealous for it, right? Just but heartbroken, mentally weary, worn out by the no's, by God's no, son, worn out by it, because I'm thinking, well, you know, why aren't you doing these things, right? I'm thinking, God, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you answering this? Why isn't this happening, right? The thing that got me was the denial of reality. You start to blur the lines between what's real and what's a lie, to the point where you don't know what lies are, because everything is potentially true. There's no sense. You don't, like, that's the problem with that's one of the main problems with the Word of Faith, right? Is that everything you say it can be truth if you believe it. And that's not how truth works. A truth, like, if I you know if there are no lies, then everything is true. Or if everything is true, then there are no lies. How do you distinguish one from the next, one from the other, excuse me, right? And I begin to see the denial of reality amongst friends, amongst family members, that, yeah, what that does is it hinders us. And I've seen it hinder people, including myself, from dealing with the problems in our lives, handling the issues in our lives, because we believe that if we address the problem, right, or believe that the problem exists, because we're actually acknowledging the reality of the situation, the reality of our trouble, that we're giving power to the situation, to the trouble, and we're making the trouble last. We're bringing the trouble into our reality with our faith, right? Because we're trusting in the trouble. We're saying that the trouble is real, right? And scripturally speaking, if you read the Bible, and I've read it over a dozen times, I lost count. There's a lot of trouble in there. As a matter of fact, Jesus promised we'd have trouble in this world. Like he promised the disciples, in this world, you'll have trouble. So there's a lot of trouble. There are complaints. There's a book dedicated to complaints in the Bible, and it's called Lamentations. I gotta pause this video, okay?